Welcome to What Matters, a podcast that looks inward at unique experiences, upward for divine direction, and outward at God's activity in our world. I'm Michelle Funk, your host, and I'm so glad you're joining us today. I have the pleasure and delight of introducing you to Pastor Penny Ellwood, who is here with us today. And I'm just going to invite Penny to say hello and to introduce herself to us.
Well, hi, Michelle. I am, as you said, I'm Penny Ellwood, and I serve as the campus pastor at our Blue Springs location, and married to Bill. Be 40 years this year.
Yay.
Yeah,
Oh,
long time.
congrats.
We're hoping we have a chance to celebrate that this
Yes.
year. But have three children, three grown children, and two of those children, the oldest and the youngest, have given us grandchildren. So we have 7 and 2 4-year-olds. So we
Nice.
love being grandparents. It's awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yes. I bet any chance you get to see them is
Oh,
a
yeah.
joy.
Yeah. And the
Yay.
fact that they're all here in Kansas City, we're really pleased.
Bonus.
Mhm.
Yeah. Good
Yeah.
stuff. Yay.
That's great.
Well, so Penny, thank you, first of all, for being here with us today and for spending some time. This podcast is about what matters. And so I just invite you to let us know. So what matters to you right now?
Okay. Well, I was thinking about this past week and what matters to me as a pastor and what's been important in my ministry. And I decided I wanted to talk about storytelling and the importance of storytelling. Of course, we know that God is the master storyteller, and his story is told in this sweeping narrative of the Bible, which begins in the creation of all things. And he starts with that. And that creation, the apex of that creation, is creation of humanity. And so we have that part of the story. And I believe that God's story doesn't end with the Bible, that his story is intended to continue, that narrative is intended to continue in really every single person's life and in every community. And that story continues with our life. And so we are called to tell that story and to share that story of our life. And I think if he calls us to tell it, then we're also called to listen to other people's stories. And I think that's why we love stories so much. It's just built into our DNA, who we are, in the image of God. So I think that he writes a story with every person's life, shaping and forming us to reveal something about himself. And every story, like every person, is unique. And each of us discover something about God that when we look at that story and we examine it, it's not just random scenes that all pile up. It's like a book, only we don't have the benefit of being able to read a chapter ahead. We have to kind of look at our life backwards a little bit. And so, our life shapes our outlook, our tendencies, our choices, and it orients us toward a certain future. And but I think the problem is that we don't often examine our lives. We don't take this time to sit down. If we're going somewhere, we get a guidebook and we read the guidebook and we study it, but we don't do that with our lives. And yet our lives, if we read backwards into it, have a lot to tell us about who we are and what themes are developing and how that makes us act and respond and react. And I think particularly women are probably the worst at looking back at our stories because we just, we're raising kids and we're doing the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So our stories are important and we need to study our life stories. And you just shared with me that there are women in our congregation that are using this time to write their stories. And I happen to know of a couple that are doing that as well. But when we examine our stories and we look for God in the midst of them, then we can make changes to our stories and help God in that process of recreating, because I think that God invites us in that process of creating and trying to restore, the original creation that we fouled up when we, when sin entered our lives. And so I got started in this process with a class called Listen to My Life.
Yeah.
And I've been doing that since I think 2008. I took the first class. I met with a group of women I'd never met before. I didn't have time. I didn't think to take this class. I was going to seminary. I thought I was going to an introduction to the class to just kind of see what it was about. And I got there and I realized it was the first class. And so I thought, well, okay, God, you must have put me here for, for some
you were
purpose.
stuck.
Yeah. And these women looked like, they were perfectly put together. And, I thought their stories are going to be, these perfect stories. And we began sharing our lives with one another and kind of looking back over parts of our life. And everybody's was messy. And, and in that process, we learned lots about ourselves and how God had been in the midst of it and places we hadn't seen him and things, where we were carrying hurt and stuck and, all kinds of things when you explore. So it was a great process. And part of my greatest joy as a pastor is to help other women, and take them through that process.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard it said, people who are professional writers, authors of books, like, they have to set up a discipline of writing so many words a day, and sitting down and doing that. And that so many of them have ideas sketched out, the beginning, the middle, the end, and how it all fits together and flows together and this and that. And, you saying that our stories are messy, it makes me think, yeah, if I had sat down at, I don't know, age 12 to write my story, it probably would have a pretty logical sequence or, just one thing would lead to another and go in a particular direction. But in living it out, it's taken a few re-edits and this chapter, oh, I had to move it around and, all of those things because, I think that like I think learn and have said it's you get in touch with yourself through your story when you do look back and see where maybe it's going in a different direction than what you had originally thought. and, and that's not all bad.
No, it's not. No,
No.
it's not all bad.
Yeah. So the class, Listen to My Life is what it's called. And so how do you remember so what did you do first? What's the
So
first
we,
step?
in the class, you use these visual maps. So you can write your story or you can draw it or you can create pictures or, any way you want to kind of capture what's going on in your life, the highs and the lows and, where maybe specifically you saw God in it. But I think, there's lots of processes that you can use to explore your life. I know there's quite a few different books on it. And this class in particular is the one I've been involved in. But I think the best way to get in touch with your story is to begin by, knowing the characters who have shaped your character. So, it's your parents, your siblings, your grandparents, your spouse, your mentors, your abusers, even friends. Who are those characters? And I think we tend to think that our story starts with our birth, but it really starts with our parents and the circle of relationships they were in. So it includes our parents, their past relationships, the issues of success and failure, power, abuse, loss, addiction, all of that begins to, influence us. And, it's taken place before we were born, but it shapes, begins to develop themes in our own lives that we have to address at some point or that influence us. And of course, every plot, it's not a good story unless there's some tension or some tragedy in it. And so I think, every story has tragedy of some sort. And some of that tragedy comes because of the fall, that we go back to Genesis, we sin entered our life and it plays itself out in many ways in our world. And that tragedy impacts our life. And it usually disrupts the status quo. It requires engagement or it sometimes it causes us to face our own mortality. If you have a cancer diagnosis, your whole life goes up in the air and you have to reshape and form it. Or if you lose someone that you love, that causes you to make changes in your life or to reflect on things that you maybe didn't look at before.
Right.
And I think every tragedy that we experience creates some kind of a loss, even if it's just a change in the normal everyday routine. And that loss is a disruption. And we have to learn to deal with that loss. So it's, there's that tragedy that creates that tension, which is, an essential element in our storytelling. But it gives movement to our stories. And as we engage in the suffering, what happens is we develop the responses, and those responses can become patterns or themes in our life. And sometimes those patterns are good and healthy, and sometimes they're not so good and healthy. When I was going through the Listen to My Life process and looking back over my life, I really had a great life, great childhood, great parents. But in my growing up, my dad was a farmer, a very hardworking farmer. And the farm was always the most important thing. So there were times in my life when I wanted my dad to be present, that he wasn't, because there was something that had to be done on the farm. And I carried a lot of resentment about that. And he had grown up in a family where his dad had very much, he was in control. There were control issues that were apparent. So, and some male chauvinism of that age, which was typical. So those things impacted my story. But I carried so much resentment towards my dad, and it was causing me to treat others in certain ways and to carry patterns in my life that I really didn't like. And I realized that I was kind of stuck there, and that I needed to forgive my dad, and not just to see the things that, the pain from the things that he had missed and hadn't been there for me for, because there was lots of good things in my dad. And so I chose to forgive and to look at the situation differently. What I realized is, in my life as an adult, I was repeating a lot of the same patterns that my dad, that I would, accusing him of. And so it allowed me to let that go, and then to reshape my own life in ways that were more healthy and were more inclusive. And it was ended up being a really good thing. And I've taught this class multiple times and told my story over and over. And it's so interesting to see in the telling and the examining of my own life, some of the pain that was there at the start is not there anymore. And as I've looked at it, I've seen other things, that I could change, or where God was in situations where I didn't realize it, or was pushing me or moving me in ways so that I could reveal his story in my own life in ways that I hadn't realized were possible.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. The beauty of the edit,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I mean, you're saying, you learned that behavior, or that it was a learned,
it was a learned behavior, and it wasn't a
Right.
good behavior to learn.
Which we all
And we see that over and
do.
over again with addictions
Right.
and, abuse in families.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But the ability to see it and to know that, hey, it's time to relearn,
yeah.
So I just love that. It gives me encouragement, to think, because there are certainly things I've learned and practiced that are not so great. But I think each of us, we have the ability, in looking back at our stories
Yeah.
and seeing where things intersect and the characters involved and all, offering grace and forgiveness as necessary. It allows us to re-edit
Yeah.
or to
And
relearn.
and sometimes you can look, some of the ways you can look forward is to see what you have done to your children by,
So true.
we tend to pass along some of those things.
So
And so to
true.
help, do what we can to help change the situation,
Yeah. Yeah.
is also an opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have great parents and in-laws, but I do also have a little list of maybe what not to do that I have
Yeah.
learned.
Yeah.
And I'm sure my kids have started their list of what not to do. That we're,
The pendulum
doggone it.
swings, doesn't it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and the other thing that I found in sharing stories, is that, when you tell your story and someone else is listening to it, there'll be parts of it that resonate with them. And sometimes in the telling, what you have learned in your experience becomes a tool that someone else can use to make changes that are needed in their story, so that they can change the trajectory, so that they're really moving in the direction that God, has written for their life, that they're not there yet. And I've seen that happen. I've seen this amazing healing when one person's story connects with another and they have this moment of epiphany, to realize, oh my gosh, this has happened in my life and I didn't realize it. And I didn't realize I was stuck there, or that I hadn't forgiven this person, or, there's just been all kinds of healing that I've seen happen, and this deep connection. When you open yourself and make yourself vulnerable and share, it's like I said, that first group, everybody looked like they were perfectly put together. And then we shared our stories. And I think so much of the time we wear these masks around and we try to, uphold these perfect images when there's all this stuff going on, and a lot of it we need help with, but we don't feel safe. And when you can really share your story and open yourself and make yourself vulnerable in the sharing, it really helps others, and it helps yourself as much too. I mean, I think it's a spiritual discipline in some ways. We don't necessarily think of it that way, but I think it is.
I've heard it said, to share your stories, to share your own personal story with someone who's earned the right to hear it. And I think maybe that's what you're talking about. It does need to be a safe place or safe relationship or a safe moment, I guess.
Right. Now, I'm glad you said that, Michelle, because it does. You need to have a safe environment in order to share that. For sure.
And so things like classes that are designed to provide that can offer that, but otherwise it does take a little bit of time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And building up a relationship that then feels safe enough to share.
I've been surprised though in this class. I mean, I've always tried to set it up that we're creating a safe environment. You set boundaries and, the story stays here and, but how willing people are to open up, and to engage in that process.
Well, sometimes I think, is anybody listening to me? We have those times of, I just need somebody to listen to me, and so maybe that's part of it too, it's golly, to be invited to have this opportunity to share.
Well, and you really honor someone when you take the time to listen to their story and to listen fully to it. I mean, you see people, we're all sitting in close proximity looking at our phones these days. And so to have somebody listen to you is a gift.
Absolutely.
I mean, it really is a gift.
Absolutely. Maybe, I mean, I feel like we're starting to come away a little bit from the pandemic, and maybe some of the ways that we can re-enter into personal relationships that don't exist through a screen. However, thank goodness for all of the ways we've been able to connect, of course. But, might be just tell me about the past 12 months. How'd you do it? And that might be a good invitation to start to tell story to one another.
Right. Hopefully we'll appreciate, with this isolation, we'll appreciate those opportunities more.
I know. I'm picturing that maybe we won't be sitting there with our phones in our hands. We'll be more willing to engage in one another, because that's what we've not been able to do for so long.
I hope so.
Yeah. So this thing of storytelling, you started by describing that's what we have available to us as a model in the Bible. It is this grand story that goes all the way. And I guess what I love about the Bible, even though it's challenging and sometimes can make me crazy because I don't quite understand everything I read, but it's told in so many different ways, different formats, methods, different liturgy. What do I want to say?
Different genres.
Yes.
Well, and you think about the Bible, if God had written just out the good parts, I mean, if you didn't have the characters like the disciples in Mark who just keep getting it wrong and getting it wrong. I mean, they're the ones that give me hope when I keep getting it
Yeah,
wrong.
right.
So your story needs to include all of it,
Mm-hmm.
because it's some of it, it's those tragedies and those things that have changed and propel you to do certain things
Mm-hmm.
that 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 change your story and
Yeah.
impact your life. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And if it was just told with all the glossy points, it wouldn't reflect life, you know.
No, it wouldn't. Well, it wouldn't be an interesting story.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need those moments of
We do
tension
need those
and
moments.
resolution.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Uh,
But I think I think when you examine your story in light of God, thinking about God as the author of it and wanting to have the opportunity to co-write your story with God,
mhm.
um, it changes it. If we were just trying to figure out all this, I want to say this, if we're just trying to figure it out, in our quest for self-identity,
Mhm.
in self-absorption,
Mhm.
that would be a pretty boring story too.
Right. Yes.
So when we look at it with God, when we are willing to take risks and be humble and to learn and to grow, then it's the beginning of a pretty interesting story,
Mhm.
and it has a much better ending.
Mhm. Yes,
Yep.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess like a first step for somebody listening or viewing is to look back
Hmm.
and then because that's where it starts in order to keep looking
Yeah.
forward,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd make a list of those characters, and that's something I taken, and I'm not going to be able to say that, an 18-month kind of 6 retreat family systems
Mhm.
theory with
Mm.
other pastors, where we really been looking at, you know, mapping some of our life stories. So family
Yeah.
systems, plays a,
Yeah.
you can tie it with that.
Right.
Um, and I lost the train of thought where I was going.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I would just start out by who are the characters,
Mhm. Yeah.
and those characters start, of course,
Right.
before your life
Yeah, yeah,
begins.
yeah. So it could even take a little bit of digging
Right.
into,
Yeah, it could.
tell me about your to our
Yeah, what
parents,
were they dealing with,
Right. Yeah.
Was it
Yeah.
the depression or
Right.
a war or a
Yeah.
death or
Mhm. Yeah.
what was going on in the
Yeah.
family there? Was there
Yeah.
abuse? Was there addiction? Was there illness?
Mhm. Yeah. And then you start to see how your story begins to unfold.
Mhm.
And then the parts that aren't so great,
Yeah.
you still, in examining them, you can lift out some meaning to them or some things that you've learned
Right.
or could yet
Yeah.
learn
I
and
mean, I think you look at
process.
the highs and the lows in your life.
Yeah.
What were the peak experiences and what did
Mhm.
they teach you?
Yeah.
And what were the low experiences? And sometimes I think what we consider a low experience is really a peak because, I'm sure you've met somebody that's been through, cancer,
Yeah.
and on the other side of it said, I wouldn't trade that experience.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
trade going through chemo, all of
Mhm.
the awful things that go with that
Yeah.
because of what you learn
Yeah.
and who comes around you.
Right.
There's just,
Right.
there's in that tension, there's all kinds of richness and learning and
Mhm.
possibility that you see.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you continue your story forward and probably have an idea of, maybe at least the next sentence, maybe even the next chapter.
Yeah, yeah.
But if it gets detoured or knocked off track, it doesn't mean your story isn't worth
No, in fact,
telling.
I would say my life did not go the way that I thought it would go
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
Um, but it's so much better,
Yeah.
than what I imagined.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, God, once you learn to trust God a little bit more as look at your story and see where God's been in it,
Mhm.
then for me, when those doors open and those opportunities to present themselves,
Mhm.
you're a little more willing to take the risk to step into them and to explore what they might lead to.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
because
Eh,
they can be some pretty amazing places.
Right, right. And that might help to add the flourishes
Yes.
that you
Yeah.
keep getting to add
Right.
into your
Right.
story. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this. I love this. I do, like you said, I know some women who've taken this time of kind of quieting. We can maybe say that during this pandemic, we've had more moments of quiet,
Mm,
perhaps,
mhm.
and have done some reflection and are writing their stories. And so keep writing
Yeah,
is the
yeah, keep
main,
writing.
yeah. And
Yeah,
we've all got a story to share,
yeah.
don't we?
I would say, to your story has power
Mm.
and it needs to be acknowledged and celebrated and told.
Yeah.
And God's been with you since you were born, and in all the
Right.
pain and joy, has formed you into the person that you are today.
Mhm.
And that process, I think, is a spiritual discipline.
Mhm.
Um, so going through that process is good and healthy.
Mhm.
However you do that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Penny. You've encouraged us all to become great authors.
Well, yeah, there.
Awesome. I appreciate this so much and your time and your
Well,
willingness
sure,
to
it's been fun.
share.
Yeah, it's
So,
caused me to think a little bit more. I
yeah,
probably need to go back and take another look at some of those areas in my story.
yeah,
Yeah, because God's still writing it. That
that's it.
when they say a good story has a beginning, a middle, and an end,
Mhm.
and the problem is we don't ever know where we are in the story. Are we
Right.
at the beginning? Are we at the middle? Are we nearing the end? But
Yeah.
I think when we try to write that story with God, thinking about God, then we hopefully are moving to a glorious ending. They say
Mhm.
every good meal should end with a dessert,
Yeah,
so you
yeah.
want to have a good,
A
nice,
really
rich,
good
yeah,
dessert
really good
coming.
dessert at the end.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for sharing what matters about our stories. I think it's something that can matter to each one of us.
Well, thanks for
So
the invitation to be here.
appreciate it. I appreciate it. That's what matters. And again, just I'm Michelle Funk, inviting you to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. So glad that you joined us today. Saying goodbye for now. Very fun. I want to be an author now, or at least try.
Yeah.
Sometimes, though, I think it's so true. We don't give our stories enough
Well,
credit and worth.
well,
And
I wish I had paid more attention to my own story. I mean, just little details, because I find when I'm preaching, it's the little things that you tell that you think are inconsequential that really